I'm going to be honest with you. I don't disagree with you. They are an absolute pain in the neck. They make no sense to own one yourself. They require more attention and looking after them than a 2-year-old on Red Bull. Yet some of us seem to absolutely love them. What is it we're referring to? None other, of course, than carbon steel trowels. What is the big deal with them? Why should you get one? In this video, we are going to talk about it. What's up, YouTube? So yes, in this video, we are going to be talking about a subject which seems to have raised its head again in the last few weeks, that of carbon steel trowels and why you should own one. Yes, there is no doubt that there is a bit of a ball ache when it comes to owning carbon steel trowels. There's this stigma that they require an awful lot of maintenance, an awful lot of looking after, and to a certain degree, that is true. That said, why do so many plasterers enjoy using carbon steel trowels when you can just buy a stainless steel perma-shape from Marshalltown, and you are set probably for 95% of your career? So why would you consider buying something like this one here, which is a 13-inch by 5-inch carbon steel Marshalltown? Why would you buy a trowel which is its biggest problem is the fact that it rusts, and is by far and away the biggest selling point of a stainless steel trowel, that it does not rust? Well, there are many pros to having a carbon steel trowel. There are some cons. Let's discuss those cons first. Obviously, the big one being that these rust. So these require some form of maintenance. So a light spray of WD-40. Few people, they wrap it in an oily rag at the end of the day. To be perfectly honest with you, an awful lot of the time, if you're using it every single day, you don't need to do anything with it. You come back the next day, there's a bit of surface rust on it. As soon as you use it, the rust is gone. The other thing, which is a slight downside, is that because it's carbon steel, it's an ever so slightly softer metal. That said, what happens is it can nick a bit easier if you hit it on a piece of metal or something like that. So you do have to be slightly more careful with it. They're really the downsides. What are the pros? Well, there are quite a few. Probably the biggest pro being that these break in so much faster. For instance, this trowel here is 9 months old. It's completely broken in. Probably took about 3 months to break it in on constant use of using it for plastering, float and set, sand and cement, render. Broke in about 3 months. But even just using it on skimming, within 6 months, you would expect a carbon steel trowel to be pretty much thereabouts. Do you get that with stainless steel? Absolutely not. It probably takes anywhere between 2 and 4 years of constant use to break a stainless steel trowel into the same level. So it gets up to speed much, much faster. The other thing as well is how easy it is to get a nice finish often depends on how sharp the trowel is. Carbon steel trowels, just because of the type of metal, get significantly sharper than the stainless steel trowels. So you're going to get that nicer finish. Generally, they tend to be slightly lighter, a little bit more flexible. There's not an awful lot in it. The other thing as well you see with a carbon steel trowel, because they were really designed for cement, is they tend to be an awful lot flatter than stainless steel trowels. Now, they do create that slight curve as time goes on, but from the box, they generally are very flat because they're meant to be used for cement. So when you think of some of the pros and cons that you have with a carbon steel trowel, you've obviously got that level of maintenance, which is a downside, but the speed of it breaking in and that really sharp edge that you get, you might be a little bit on the fence. Why is it that you would consider going over to carbon steel trowels? Well, quite simply, for a trowel that can do absolutely everything, the carbon steel trowel just gets it to another level. Yes, so many plasterers, they say, go for a 14-inch Marshalltown perma-shape. There is no doubt that those trowels are good trowels, but a carbon steel trowel is a great trowel, and that really is where the difference is. You can get a really good finish with a Marshalltown stainless steel, but you can get a really great finish with a carbon steel Marshalltown, or say a carbon steel Nell or whatever, just because the level of sharpness that you get with a carbon steel trowel that you do not get with stainless steel trowels. Yes, if you're the sort of individual that doesn't like to carry hundreds of trowels around, I appreciate I always have a lot of trowels, but I don't generally use any other than just the one, which in this case is this 13-inch Marshalltown. So that generally tends to be the only one that I use. Yes, with a carbon steel trowel, you can completely skip using a flexible trowel because you can get that sharp edge retention that you cannot get on a stainless steel. That doesn't mean you can't get a good finish on a stainless steel Marshalltown. It is just not as easy. That said then, does that mean that everybody should go over to carbon steel plastering trowels? Absolutely not. And really the main reason being is that carbon steel trowels do not fare well when they are not being used all the time. So if you're a plasterer that perhaps is just starting out, or maybe you've just gone on your own and your diary is a bit spotty, maybe you only have 1 or 2 days a week, perhaps you're a builder, you're only plastering once or twice a month, a carbon steel trowel would be a mistake for you. And the reason being is carbon steel trowels do not fare well when they're just stored. Yes, you can oil them up, that will help massively. But as soon as that oil starts to dry out, as soon as it starts to get wet, it will start picking up that surface rust, which the longer you leave it, the worse it gets. That said, it's not terrible to get rid of. Sand and cement will remove it, sanding it will remove it, putting it in vinegar will make a big difference to it. But unless you are plastering as your main trade and you're doing it all the time, you do not want to get a carbon steel trowel. Stick to the stainless steel. It means you can literally come back a year later, it's in exactly the same condition. If you did that with a carbon steel trowel, even if you'd oiled it, came back a year later, it would be a rust bucket. So that is really important. You have to ask yourself, how much skimming am I doing? If it's a lot, carbon steel, amazing. We already mentioned, if you only want one trowel that does everything, a carbon steel will do it better than stainless steel. Doesn't mean you can't get a good finish. Carbon steel will just do it better just because of how sharp it is. One of the other things which is really nice about carbon steel trowel is that what you get is very light pitting from the rust on the underside. It's negligible. What you find is it actually applies the plaster a lot quicker, a lot more even, because it gives a little bit of grip. With a stainless steel trowel, you'll get slide, especially the longer you've had the trowel. It actually has a polishing effect the longer you use a stainless steel trowel. So that's underside of that stainless steel trowel will be almost like a mirror. So it doesn't pull the plaster off as easily as a carbon steel trowel. So what you'll find is with a carbon, you can go a little bit quicker because it will move that plaster a little bit evenly and more evenly. It is not an awful lot, but it is the small things that make up the reason why you should make such a peculiar decision as to get a trowel that requires so much work to maintain. That said, with regards to the maintenance, there are a couple of things that are worth doing. Generally, whenever we get a brand new trowel that's carbon steel, usually we'll dip it in something like vinegar or Coke. This is a pretty well-known practice now. What that does is called forcing a patina. A patina is obviously where rust develops over time, and then that orange rust, the stuff that's oxidized, that comes off and the carbon goes black. So dipping it in Coke or vinegar will force it to go black immediately. Now, it doesn't make a huge difference to the underside, but the back of the trowel, where the spine is, what that does is it massively reduces rust on the top because it's already got that layer of rust already, which is black. The underside, the more you use it, it will wear that back off. And then obviously as it gets wet, it rusts again, wears off, etc. And that's where you get that more of a patchy type of patina, which in a way for many plasterers looks desirable. So that's one thing you can do, is just to soak it in vinegar or Coca-Cola or whatever, just to create that patina. The other thing that's worth having, we generally carry a can of WD-40. So for our best trowels, we usually give a light spray of WD-40. I can't be bothered with an oily rag personally. They all get dumped in the box at the end of the day. So light spray, that will go a long way. It isn't necessary if you plaster all the time, but just purely because I'm trying to break these trowels in a little bit faster, it does make a difference. So that really is it when it comes to carbon steel trowels. In our opinion, there are really only two that are worth mentioning, which is the Marshalltown carbon steel. We do have the cement trowel, it's very good, but as time's gone on, I've actually preferred the plastering version. For me, I personally recommend 13 by 5. It applies a bit better. It's breaking in very, very quickly. But the other one, which is excellent, is the 14 by 4 4/4 from Nella. That is also an incredible trowel. That is more of a cement trowel, so it's a lot stiffer, but that gives an incredible finish. Both of those trowels are fantastic, and I'd thoroughly recommend them to any person who's considering going into or going over to a carbon steel trowel. So in summary, what's the thoughts? Should you get a carbon steel trowel or not? Well, as we've already mentioned, it really boils down to if you're plastering all the time, you're possibly considering just going over to one trowel, which does make a big difference when it comes to flatness, because you don't have those issues with waves that you can get with a flexible trowel. So it'll give you that razor sharp finish, that really slick finish that you get with a flexible trowel, but you're not compromising on flatness because the trowel is still stiff. So as any subscribers that watch our channel know, we are massive fans of carbon steel trowels. We have been for many years, and it's really the only trowel we tend to recommend to plasterers because the finish is just so good. So we hope this video has been helpful for those that are on the fence, those that are like die-hard Marshalltown perma-shapes. You know, I'm glad you enjoy them. I'm going to be honest with you, they're good trowels, but they're not great trowels. You know, the finish is just not that great. I'm more than happy to go side by side with somebody and show that it is, the finish is just next level when it comes to a carbon steel trowel, if you're willing to make that effort just to look after it. So we hope this video has been helpful. Consider giving it a thumbs up, subscribing, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks again.